Been struggling to put that CushCore on because you want that smooth ride, taking everything you can to get it on. We're gonna give you the best tips and show you how to install it quick and easy. All right, so when we're getting into CushCore, the first thing you have to recognize, are you throwing a new tire on your wheel or are you using some old tires? For me, for this one, I'm gonna use my old tires because they still don't have a ton of miles on them and I still think they got a lot of life on here. So what I'm gonna wanna do is, and this is the first pro tip, either use like a 5-gallon bucket, or if you got a nice big trash can like this is gonna basically be your workstation, right? So we're gonna start with our bike here and we're gonna wanna get this valve stem off and start letting all that air out. If you're running tubeless, you're gonna have all that sealant in there. You're gonna need to get all that out. So let's get the air out of this tire, let's get the sealant removed, and then we'll get started on the actual CushCore. All right, so whether you're, starting with a brand new tire, or like I said with this instance, I'm gonna keep running this same Specialized Butcher here because it's got still quite a bit of mileage and life left on it. The first thing you wanna do is get all that air out of the tire so you can get that sealant out if you're running tubeless to get ready to put that CushCore in. So depending on how much pressure you run, I'm a bigger guy, I run a little bit more pressure than most people. So what I'm gonna do is just let a little bit of air out first, kind of get it going, so that way when I go to take this valve stem off, I'm not shooting my cap everywhere and having to go find it. So get your tool, go ahead and just get that thing ready to go, break it loose, and then just be careful as you pull it out. Get all that air out, right? We want to get all the air out of the tire because what we're going to do is pull this tire away from the wheel and we're going to get all that sealant out real quick. So let's get into that next. All right, so we got all the air out of the tire. What we're going to want to do is get that sealant out there, get it all cleaned up, and get into the CushCore. So we're gonna wanna break the bead here real quick. We're just gonna kind of push around, get that bead broken away from the wheel, right? And then always having a nice set of tire levers, always gonna come in handy. And what we're gonna wanna do is just kind of start pulling this off, right? So doing everything on camera always seems a little bit more difficult. So my challenges may not seem like they're gonna be your challenges. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're popping this thing off, right? I want to make sure I'm keeping all my sealant down here at the bottom. So I'm going to keep the tire vertical, and now I'm just going to kind of run this tire lever up all the way around. As you'll see, the sealant's kind of already right there. We're just going to drain it out just like that. All right, so we've got the first half of our tire separated from our wheel. We got all that sealant in there. Some people just take a rag, they kind of wipe it out depending on how much sealant they have. Another cool pro tip that we recommend, Preston behind the camera highly recommends this, is go ahead and use your Stan's injector, which we'll use this later when we go ahead and re-inject our sealant back into the wheel after we've installed the CushCore, but we can actually use this for the opposite effect. So what we can do here is actually use this syringe to pull the sealant out of the wheel. Maybe we'll set up the camera here real quick so you can kind of see it in action. And it just kind of, makes it easier that you're not buying this just to inject the sealant, but instead you're also using it to remove old sealant when you're changing it out. So let's get into that real quick too. All right, so I got my Stan's no tubes injector out right here. We can see it kind of here. What I'm gonna do is now we've got all that sealant pooled right down here at the bottom. I'm just gonna put this down and just start getting all that sealant worked up, right? So I got a decent amount in here. Now one thing I'll say also is maybe your sealant isn't too old and you've decided to switch to CushCore, you can always reuse the sealant as long as it doesn't look too bad. So now that you can use this injector right here basically to get all that sealant out of there. All right, now that I've got my tire off completely of the wheel, I've got it all cleaned out, the sealant's removed. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna go ahead and just take my wheel before we even start, and I'm just gonna inspect all of this rim tape to make sure there's no damage around the edges or anything like that, because if the case is that there's some damage there, what you're gonna wanna do is replace it with some new rim tape, right? Just to make sure it's there. As well as keep in mind, as we're working to get that CushCore on here in a few minutes, and we're using different tools, we want to make sure that we're really careful that we're not in here pushing down on this, because what can happen is we can get that CushCore completely installed and then realize that we damaged that rim tape and now we're not holding air. So it's just good, you know, I like to always keep some rim tape on hand just in case you damage it or something. It's not going to hurt, you know, to have this in case you ever need it. So just a pro tip there, do a good inspection. Make sure that tape's sealed, and as you're working through the process, just in case you do a mistake, you'll have that rim tape to go ahead and reseal it and make sure you're up there holding air. All right, so I checked over my rim tape. Everything's looking nice and sealed. It's still looking really good, so I don't need to replace it, thankfully, right now. So let's move into here. What we're gonna be installing today is the CushCore XC. Now, because I do ride a Specialized Enduro, I probably could go with the Pro, but I'm sure you've heard from your friends or you've read out there on the internet or whatever, the XC does a phenomenal job at still doing what it needs to. It also makes it a lot easier to install. So maybe if it is your first time, XC probably is the route to go. So I'm gonna be installing the CushCore XC here. I like different colors on my bike. I like to match, things like that. So I went ahead and also grabbed the CushCore valves in turquoise to kind of match my blue pedals, as you can see here. So I'm just kind of, following that color scheme. I also went ahead and grabbed it because I feel like if they're making a tool, you might as well use it, right? I got the bead bro here, which is going to help us when we're putting that bead and creating that slack around the wheel, which you'll see here in a few minutes, as well as I got the bead dropper. This is going to be a significant tool, similar to like a tire lever, which you can use a tire lever. And this is just going to help create that slack around again as we're getting that tire back on over that CushCore. So these are the products I'm going to be using here in this video. So let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to remove my old valve stem and I'm going to put the new one on, and then we're going to get started. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove my valve stem. If you've never done this before, there's going to be a sealed bolt right here that kind of holds that against the wheel. We're just going to kind of go ahead and screw that all the way off. I would say, you might be saying, well, why don't I just use my old valve stem? Well, the good thing here is if you look at this old one here, let's see if we can get it on camera here. All the air is coming from a singular hole right here at the bottom. When our CushCore is around this wheel, what we're going to see is that's going to actually not allow any air to come into the wheel with our previous valve stem. So that's why when we're using these CushCores, which I'll get a nice little close-up right here for you to see, the air is actually coming from the sides as well. So what it allows is, as the CushCore is settled onto the valve stem, it allows the air to still travel in and inflate your tire. So that is why it is a primary thing to go ahead and use CushCore valve stems. They do, with the system, they do come with their own valve stems, but again, like I mentioned, I'm kind of a color coordinator, so I went with the turquoise instead of the green that are come with it because I wanted to match my pedals and, want my bike to look real good and cute. So let's go ahead and get this installed. All right, so I've pulled out my first thing of CushCore. This is kind of what it looks like here. But also what you get was kind of cool is, like I said, you get the green valve stems here, if that's the color you're going to rock, or you want to get a different color. You also get some 6 stickers, so if you want to slap some stickers around, they give you plenty of them. Pretty cool, but let's not get into that right now. Let's get in here. So the first thing you're going to notice is it's kind of all over the place. So a good tip you could do is you could throw this out in the sun for a little while. The sun will kind of warm it up, get it nice and shaped. But because we're dealing with XC, it kind of gives us a little bit more flexibility in what we're working with. So in order to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the valve stem directly away from me and adjacent from where I'm working. And I'm going to find this little notch here, and I'm going to line that up with my valve stem, and that's where I'm going to start when I insert it onto the wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place that right there, and what I'm going to do is kind of keep pressure here and use my thumbs along the wheel as I bring it around. Now what you're going to see is as we get down here, you're like, how's this going to fit? Now this is where we're going to start needing to put a little bit more force into it and stretch the CushCore around the wheel to make sure we do it. So I'm going to kind of place it into my body and just start working it around. All right, so now that I've got this all the way around, it was a little bit of a fight. Again, that's probably where I should have just gone ahead and thrown it out there in the sun a little bit, get it a little loosened up. But I did get it on. I've made sure it's all nice and smooth. It's coming off the edges of the tire here. I'm gonna turn it this way so maybe you can get a little bit of a better vision here. I've put the indent here lined up with my valve stem. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab the tire and we're gonna start getting that first set of tire around the CushCore. All right, so now what we're gonna wanna do is get the tire all the way onto our wheel. Now that we've got the CushCore around it. So for me, again, I'm using the same tire I've been using. Big thing you wanna make sure you're paying attention to here is when you put your tire on, make sure it's going with the right direction. For example, with the Specialized Butcher tire here, is they have this great little logo right here and it tells you which rotation. One thing I've also noticed that I can tell you is if you look at tread pattern, they kind of are themselves forming an arrow pointing in which the tire needs to go for direction. So what I know is I got my rotor here. My rotor's gonna go on that side. I'm gonna go ahead and keep that in mind to make sure. Now what I'm doing here, this is pretty straightforward, is I'm just setting the wheel into the tire before I even go ahead and set any of the beads or any of the walls in. I just wanna get it on, get it set up, and what I'm gonna do here, another pro tip, is you wanna make sure so you don't look like, you know, a young one out there, and you wanna just set that sidewall patch right there with your valve stem. So now we'll get into, which is installing this first wall around, where it's gonna start getting into a little bit of a difficulty, but hopefully we'll give you some great tips here to get it all installed nice and easy. All right, so now we're actually gonna get into basically the bread and butter here of our install of CushCore, which is installing. The first step is getting that first wall in here around the wheel. Now, I've double checked. My wheel's going in the right, my tire's going in the right direction. I have my valve stem lined up with my sidewall patch over here, so I'm looking cool out on the trails. No one's gonna judge me for not knowing how to ride good because that patch is lined up. So now, what I'm gonna wanna do here is I'm gonna wanna make sure I'm working towards my valve stem. So my valve stem, again, stays away from the body, and I'm gonna start here. What I'm gonna do is just first start by pinching and kind of setting this bead in underneath the CushCore and into the wheel. Once I start getting it started, you'll see it kind of is almost assisting you a little bit here and pinching it in there. Now what you'll see as we move along, it's gonna get a little bit harder. So as we get it going, we're actually gonna start rolling the tire underneath the CushCore even more. And what I mean by this is you're gonna kind of take your thumbs and push them in and just ensure you'll kind of feel a little bit of a pop there. And what that means is that bead is kind of set underneath that wheel right here on the sidewall and giving you a little bit more slack. So what we're gonna do is just continue working around here. We do wanna be careful here not to push the CushCore all the way off the wheel, right? So we're just gonna go ahead and keep moving this around, get it nice and set. Again, we're working kind of parallel side to side on each side, working towards that valve stem. So we're getting a little bit closer here. Again, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break after just kind of slowly putting it in, and I'm just gonna make sure I use my thumb and just roll that bead in there on each side. Again, I'm gonna come right over here on this side and do the same thing, and just keep working it around the tire. Now, it's really important here is you just kind of gotta stay a little patient, right? Don't worry about rushing it. There's no timer going. No one's gonna think you're cool because you did your CushCore in less than 2 minutes. What's important though is that you're out there riding and you have it properly installed. So now we're getting up here. We've worked our way to, so many, 6, 7 spokes. Is a good friend of ours, Kyle and April MTB. Make sure to check out their channel if you haven't. They also offer great tips. But we're counting our spokes right here. We're getting here close to our valve stem, and this is where we're gonna really wanna make sure we create all that slack. So as you see here, we've kind of run out of a little bit of slack here to work around. So this is where I'm just gonna kind of work my way around the tire and keep pushing that slack around. What it's kind of doing is just creating a little bit more for me to work with up here at the top near the valve stem. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, I'm jamming my fingers in there, it's not doing a lot of job, it's kind of hurting. So the other good thing you can do, like I talked about earlier, is they have these great tools here. Now what I can do with this is, again, like we also mentioned previously, be careful of your rim tape. I don't want to just jam this thing in there and start damaging my rim tape. What I want to do is just kind of create a little bit of slack. So I'm just kind of pushing it in, creating a little bit of slack here as I get up towards the front. So I'm going to do this on both sides and just keep working it. Okay, so now I've gotten a little bit, I'm almost here at the end. It's going to get a little bit more difficult. Again, another great thing what we want to do here is we want to then go into, CushCore has created all these, they understand the problems that we're working with as riders. They got this thing, we always need a bro, right? Everyone needs a good bro, well they got the bead bro. So the bead bro here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of set this right here. And this is going to kind of like, think of the cheat code where you can kind of save your progress in the video game, right? This thing just kind of saves our progress in here. And what we're going to want to do is just set this on here and press it right into the wheel. So once I got it on, I'm going to go ahead and create a little bit of tension here. And all this is saving my progress. So as I'm working this last angle here on the tire, it's not going to pop off and come right back here. And I'm going to be upset because I've reset from where I'm at. So now I'm just going to keep working this slack. Again, just kind of pressuring this through. Making sure we're nice and tucked in here. Get this bead in here nice. And as you can see, it's slowly giving me a little bit more slack as I move through here, right? So it's making it nice and easy to get up in here and just continually set this on. Now you're going to start getting a little bit of struggle here, and this is where we're going to kind of use this here to just kind of pop it right in there for us. Kind of use your thumb as your second bead bro, because you can always count on yourself, and just pop it right on there just like that. We're just about there. This one, there we go. So now that we've got one side on, we can go ahead and thank our bead bro. Thanks for helping us out here. Get that thing popped off, and we'll get into working on the other side. So let's get into that. All right, so I got my one side on. As you see, there's a little bit of struggle. You're kind of having to work your way through it, but that's all part of the process. That kind of makes it fun, kind of makes it worth it when you're out there riding it. I got my side on, everything's looking good. What I'm gonna wanna do here is go ahead and flip it over, and we're basically gonna do the same thing on this side now, but thankfully we've got one side set, so we don't have to worry about that CushCore popping off the bottom side or anything like that. Again, I'm working with my valve stem opposite of my body, and I'm just gonna start again here and start pressing this in underneath the wheel. And what you're going to want to do is get it to kind of set and stay for you a little bit. And what it does is it kind of helps hold it. So now I'm just going to keep working away or working around similar to what I was doing on the other side. And just kind of use my thumbs here. And what you're going to feel is you're actually going to feel that CushCore pressing against that sidewall of the tire. But as you're kind of working it, you'll feel that bead slip underneath it. And that's kind of giving you that point of tactile response, you could say, that says you're doing a great job, right? This is that star you get to put down next to your name saying you're doing a good job. So again, I'm just gonna sit here and work around and kind of get that going. As I start getting a little bit more in, what I do then is now this is when I'm really gonna go back through and just ensure I'm earning that star today and just get that bead set real nice underneath. And what it does also is, again, it's just creating that slack. The more slack you create as you move around the tire, the easier your job's gonna be. So just keep working your way around. We're gonna get right up here again, next to our valve stem. We've created a lot of slack here this time, so things are going good. So now, again, I'm gonna go ahead and use some of the tools I have, right? Start off with my bead bro, and I'm gonna go ahead and just set this in, because the last thing I want is to lose any progress, right? I don't really want to lose any of my progress I've been working so hard for. So I'm just going to kind of push this in and then set it down just like that. Put my cheat code in, and then again, I'm going to use this and just slowly work it around here, right? I've got a decent amount of slack here. And just like that, we're popped it on. What I want to do here though is, again, I want to make sure that bead's set all the way around. But I'm going to go ahead and remove my bead bro, which looks like I didn't even actually install it all the way. As you can see, it's kind of popped off here already, but that's okay. I think if you're doing a great job from the start, you may not even need that. So what I'm just going to do is just kind of work around. Thankfully, my trash can here is on wheels, so it kind of rolls with me, or maybe you need to kind of walk around your workstation. But I'm just setting that bead nice and underneath here, because what I'm going to want to do next is I'm going to want to go ahead and fill it up with air before I even put any sealant in, just to double check that, make sure everything's set, it's holding air, I didn't damage any of that rim tape, the CushCore set properly before I go ahead and start all over with that sealant to put in after that. But it's just a good checkpoint to go ahead and throw some air in there and make sure it's all good to go. So let's go ahead and set some air in there and see how it's going. All right, so now that we got it on, what we want to do is we want to get those beads set. Now, if you have a high pressure floor pump, that could do the job. It's going to take a little bit of effort. You're going to really have to pump it on. Or, you know, in our case, we have air compressors or whatever it may be, so we could just really use that to kind of really set that bead. So what you're going to do there, you just want to make sure you get that air on there, get that pump to fit. You might want to throw it on the ground if you have to. But what you're going to do is just really get that pump in there. You're not really going to hear it set, but you know that it's there. Right, so now I'm set, I'm holding air. I just want to kind of be paying attention here to make sure that my rim tape and everything else is holding nice for me. I don't hear anything leaking out, I don't feel anything. It all looks good. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and let all the air back out. And now I'm going to go ahead and inject my sealant into the tire and be good to go. So let's go ahead and get into that. All right, so now that we've gone ahead and we've checked the air, we know that the rim tape is still nice and sealed. We got our bead set. What I'm going to go ahead and do is use some of our Stan's no tube sealant with our sealant injector here. And because I'm running a 2.3 tire, if you look at the back of your Stan's bottle, it's going to tell you how much to put in. This is saying between 60 and 90 milliliters. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and throw in, is 60 to 90 milliliters. So let's go ahead and get some of that in the injector and just start throwing it in the tire. Try not to make too much of a mess like I'm doing right now. I'm sure you guys can all do better here. Now, because you put some in, it's always good to go ahead and kind of pull a little bit out, so that way when you pop this thing off, it's not shooting everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit more. And again, I'm going to pull back just a little bit to relieve some of that pressure so it doesn't go shooting out. I'm also doing this still over the trash can, just to go ahead and ensure that I'm not getting it everywhere. It's good to have a nice shop rag with you to keep everything going. All right, so now that we got our sealant within the tire, what we're going to go ahead and do is re-put on our valve stem and get some air in here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and air it up here, just to double check that sealant and everything's set in there, everything's good. Now what I'd like to just go ahead and talk about here is This was my first time installing CushCore, and as you can see, there was a little bit of struggle, but it wasn't too bad. If you use the tools that were provided and you take your time, you work through it, it's all gonna be just fine. Get out there, give it a shot, and enjoy the plush ride that CushCore has to offer. Be sure to stick around here. We put videos out every week, and we're getting all kinds of informationals, so we look forward to seeing your comments. So as always, keep pedaling.